Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Let's now take a look at a major decision from the National Assembly, one that could shape the financial future of millions of Nigerians. The Senate has approved key tax reform bills, but here's the twist. They've turned down the proposed VAT hike. A classic case of reform versus reality, many have argued. On one hand, the tax system is getting a much-needed overhaul, streamlining revenue collection, cutting inefficiencies, and introducing new penalties for tax evasion. But on the other hand, the rejection of the VAT hike means the government must find alternative ways to boost revenue without burdening citizens.
The four major tax reform bills passed by the Senate include Nigerian Tax Administration Bill 2024, Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill 2024, Nigerian Tax Bill 2024, Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill 2024. The VAT remains at 7.5%, rejected the proposed increase to 10%. The new VAT sharing formula, 10% for the federal government, 55% for states and the federal capital territory, and 35% for local governments. States can now establish their own revenue tax boards, decentralizing tax collection.
Well, joining us now to give us a breakdown of what this tax reform bills means, its impact on Nigeria and, of course, Nigerians, is Chief Economist and Lead Head of SPM Professionals, Dr. Paul Alaje, who joins us this morning. Thank you for being here. It seems like it's all uhuru. Let me use that word now for Nigeria's economy. Most importantly, looking at the sharing formula, 35%, 10% for federal government, not forgetting to 35% for local government, 55% as well. And then you can go ahead and set up your own tax boards. Please, kindly shed more light, especially to our viewers, on how beneficial this move is.
Yeah, thank you so very much. First of all, I must congratulate the Senate. After a long time, there is now courage to pass the tax bill. And of course, harmonization will be done with the House of Representatives. When that is done, a single bill that has been harmonized between the House of Representatives and the Nigerian Senate will be passed to the President for him to consider and possibly append the signature. Then we say we have an act. One of the things that Senate has done, which of course was done by the House of Representatives, is never to increase VAT. I remember that I spoke with your correspondents when this was a trending issue as to whether we should increase VAT that's been recommended by the committee from 7.5 to 10% and an onward increase in the future. And I mentioned that we have to tread very cautiously, knowing fully well of the situation that we are faced with now, that VAT should not be increased. There are a few of recommendations that we made that was adopted by the Senate and House of Representatives together. It's important for that decentralization because it is clear that FRS alone cannot have that spread. And I must give credit to FRS for what they've done thus far. The spread, most of the time, surpassing their own targets. But it's also important that some of the states will have their own board, but collaborate, because now we're having national tax bill. There is nothing like only the federal government. We have national, and all of these can now collaborate under a national nomenclature that we have. So I think it's a good one. And to the large part of it, I also think that states will need to become more responsible, because the 55% going to states and the 35% going to local government, what federal government is demonstrating is that we are now at a time where we support decentralization. Before now, it used to be the 15 to federal government. Federal government is delivering more by reducing its components to 10%. So when you hear of VAT, you should now know that VAT is more for states and for local government, as the percentage federal government takes has further reduced by 50%, that is from 15% now to 10%.
Now, Dr. Alaje, what benefits does this bring to the ordinary Nigerian who have a trust deficit in government? They believe that we're going to be paying more money, and we haven't seen what they've done with the monies we've given them in the past. Now that the federating units have been empowered and would be given more money, what should ordinary Nigerians expect?
Well, like I said, we need to ask questions from state authorities. We need to ask questions from local authorities because they have access to more funds even before this tax bill is passed at the Senate. Before now, we have seen that revenue that goes to states has increased by, say, 200%, in some instances 240% for most states. So when we look at what should we do is to now ask those states questions. I said once before that President Tinubu's policy, he hoped that the state government will invest most of the money back into their respective economies at the subnational level. But the question is, was that done? Have we seen that kind of investment? Yes, we have seen it in some states, about few states. But as I talk to you, there are still some states that have not been able to pay the minimum wage. And that is really sad. The minimum wage is not paid by some states. What citizens should do is to ask questions, is to ask to hold their leaders accountable. The way many persons are doing it for federal government, which I do not in any way condemn, which I do not in any way criticize, which I think is commendable. We need to also have doing the same for different state governments. We need to have those, I call them champions of democracy and good governance, the civil society. They need to ask the same questions, even at respective states. Because if we don't, eventually we count the number of poor people in Nigeria. Meanwhile, we have at least 36 subnational with the FCT and the federal government. But most of the time, attention goes to the federal government, which is not wrong. But we need to do something by also making, especially those state governments, very, very accountable.
One major issue we have as a country when it comes to conversations about tax is poor implementation. Are there any steps that need to be taken to ensure that we have proper implementation of these policies? But we'll have your response when we come back from this break. Welcome back to the show. We're still looking at the tax reforms that have been approved by the Senate and the rejection of VAT. We have Paul Alaje joining us this morning. Now, before we went on the break, I had asked you about what steps need to be taken because we struggle with proper implementation. So what other steps need to be taken to ensure that these approvals do not just become paperwork and we can see a proper implementation?
Well, it's the purposefulness of those in authority and purposefulness of those that work at respective tax agencies, be it at the federal, state, or local government. And one of the things that this tax reform has done, because I mentioned that I have support for it up to about 60 to 70%. One of the things that this tax reform has done is elimination or reduction, drastic reduction in multiple taxation. What we don't expect to see again is some people carrying stick all over our roads and putting it under our vehicles in the name of one environmental bill or that bill or the other. So this tax reform seems to have settled some of those concerns. Another one is vehicle traveling from Lagos to Sokoto do not need to pay over 40 taxes and charges anymore if the tax reform is properly implemented. And there is an administration of some sort that seems to investigate if people are not comfortable. We have not had that before. So people must be able to look at the bill and also ask questions again and hold state, federal, or local government accountable. So that is if there is no proper implementation of the same. I also think the authorities will need to take it more seriously in ensuring what this will do for us is that we now have understanding of what different entities will do. And you see, this will not just be the Senate just passing. It must emanate from the people. And how do I mean? We are going to have all political parties make contribution to such documents. We are going to have all peoples. You know, if you read the peoples of Nigeria, I can't remember when people from my village made contribution to that constitution to say that we the peoples of Nigeria. So even if we are going to make it a form of reform, that we now have a lot of Nigerian different people make contribution to it, then we can have a major progress. Because sometimes we as a people, sometimes including our leader, want the nation to move forward. But the document that put us together, called the Constitution, seems to have some challenge. And that is why lawyers and those civil society are saying we might just need to have a major review of this law, our Constitution, I beg your pardon. And for me, as an economist, I know that the major challenge we have is that, listen, if President Tinubu has done 4 years and if he likes wants to run again and Nigeria wishes to vote, and we say that, oh, we want to vote for President Tinubu, and he has 8 years, listen, what will happen immediately after he leaves? If President Tinubu brings somebody that is closest to him and say, I want this person to continue, I can tell you, 70% that person will still do away with President Tinubu policy. So when are we going to have consistency and progress in our economy? It is because we do some, and it's not just since President Obasanjo. This has been from Green Revolution. I can state in economic history, Nigerian economic history, how we have departed from one policy or the other, not mindful of how much we have devoted to conception, to implementation, and actual things that happen in the policy. All of those gone until we now say that we want to start another thing. We now start spending new money, opening bids for people to come afresh, and all of this will have implications on the economy.
I kind of agree with you, because a national economic plan would be the best way to go. I mean, I've also asked myself many times that why is it that if the administration comes forth, they completely change, there's no continuity. They just change what the other person was doing. I mean, from the late...
From the same party.
Yes, late President Musa Yar'Adua. I mean, when President Jonathan came on board, he changed. And then when, President Buhari won the elections, he also came with his own plan and changed everything completely. And that's a big fear. But you've talked about the National Economic Development Plan and how it needs to be put into the Constitution, into law. And then each president will be bound by it. Same with the subnationals. But if I may ask, now that we've seen the tax reform bills, how are we certain that it will still be able to trickle down to the subnationals? Mostly, let's look at governors this time. They now have the wherewithal to be able to have their own tax boards and so on. But is there any fear? Who would be able to monitor them? Who would monitor their tax boards? Who would be able to ensure that there's some form of accountability when it comes to managing these taxes?
Well, before now, they have tax boards. As I talk to you, most states have their tax board. They call it states, so if it is Lagos State, LIRS, Lagos State Internal Revenue Service. So the difference, one is the change of nomenclature and a little bit more of empowerment. Lagos State, Plateau State, Oyo State, Kano State, they all have their own revenue board. Even Benue State, most of the states, even in the East, and they are all doing their bit in collecting revenue that belongs to states, which includes, what's it called now? Personal income tax. They are revenue that go to states. Two, what this enables them to do is also to now collect some revenues that federal government is collecting on their behalf and seek remit back to them. Not all, but few. So these revenues can now be collected by them. Now, this is their money. Whether they manage it themselves well or not is another conversation entirely, because it is their money. But the concern here is that Nigerians also have a responsibility to ask that if we are going to pay more, or if we are dragging Nigerians to tax brackets, the question will be, where that we are dragging us to, where is the performance of what you have asked us to pay for? Where can we trace, can we compare how much you earn in revenue or in taxes with the kind of project implementation that you have done? And I think this is very important. So do I think federal government, we want to now start monitoring respective state government? I doubt if the federal government will have that capacity, or if the law states that the federal government will monitor. I think what will happen most of the time is to have a joint committee, which is why we are changing the name from the FRS to the National Revenue Service. So we can have something national in nature where all different revenue agencies, boards can come together, and as a federating unit, we can have conversation, we can have meeting, we can make law, we can take decision, we can share revenue at that level. So I don't think that it will be the federal government will have that power over the states to say that this is what must be. I think states will become relatively more autonomous. And eventually, when we are talking of economic decentralization, the truth is that we might be having it gradually. We might be having that decentralization gradually. So we just need some major moves. Then we can know that perhaps the center influence will reduce, because revenue is one of the ways you can reduce influence of a component of the unit. Reducing federal government share of VAT by 10% and giving that to the local government is a way to also reduce that influence revenue that the federal government has. But you should know that to him that much is given, we're expecting more. What does it mean? If federal government is saying we are doing away with some of our revenue, then we should know that responsibility will also go to the state and to the local government.
Paul Alaje, thank you this morning for joining us and just sort of breaking down the reforms, the tax reforms, what the next steps are, and how we can make the best of our tax. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.